There is an art to self-preservation, one that requires no great fanfare, but rather a steady, almost unnoticeable discipline of the soul. This art, as we shall see, revolves around the simple but profound principle of setting boundaries, those invisible lines we draw in our lives to protect the sanctity of our hearts and minds. In every relationship, there exists a subtle but unmistakable balance. The balance between giving and receiving, between love and respect. But what happens when this balance is disturbed? When certain individuals, through their conduct, seek to drain us, manipulate us, or force us to compromise our values. This is where the matter of boundaries becomes not just relevant, but vital. Toxicity is not always obvious at first. Often it wears the mask of familiarity, comfort, or even affection. But one must not be deceived. The toxic individual operates on the premise of one-sidedness. Their needs come first, their demands take precedence, and your well-being is an afterthought if thought of at all. It is in such relationships that one is tempted to ignore their own needs, to prioritize others to the point of self-neglect. But this, dear listener, is where the danger lies. To set boundaries, then, is not a declaration of hostility. It is, rather, a declaration of health. It is the recognition that you, too, have the right to peace, dignity, and respect. Boundaries are not walls, they are fences, soft but firm, that define where you end and another begins. They tell you that it is okay to say no without feeling guilty, that it is acceptable to protect your time, your energy, and your peace. The first step in setting these boundaries is the recognition of your own worth. You are not a servant to the whims of another. You are a person of intrinsic value, deserving of respect. When you internalize this truth, the practice of setting boundaries becomes less about defending yourself and more about asserting your right to live a life unencumbered by unhealthy dynamics. But how does one set these boundaries without feeling overwhelmed by guilt or fear? The process is far simpler than we imagine. Begin by identifying what causes you distress in your relationships, what actions or words leave you drained, violated, or resentful. These are the very areas where boundaries need to be established. Communicate those boundaries clearly. This is where the real difficulty often lies, not in the setting of the boundary itself, but in the communication. People will resist. They may try to guilt you, manipulate you, or dismiss your feelings. But remember, the act of communicating a boundary is not a demand for agreement. It is a simple declaration of self-respect. You are not asking for permission to live according to your values. You are simply informing others that your limits are in place. There is also an internal work to be done. It is common to feel discomfort when we first set boundaries, especially with those we have allowed too much freedom in our lives. The discomfort arises not from the boundary itself, but from the fear of disappointing others or facing conflict. However, it is crucial to remember that this discomfort is temporary, and the long-term benefit is an enhanced sense of self and peace. There will be times when toxic individuals attempt to overstep your boundaries. Here, consistency is key. Stand firm in your resolve. Each time you uphold your boundaries, you reaffirm your right to respect and harmony. And while you may encounter resistance, you will also gain a sense of freedom from the weight of guilt, manipulation, and the drain of unhealthy relationships. Recognizing toxicity in relationships is an essential first step in protecting oneself from the harmful effects of toxic people. Toxicity often doesn't announce itself with glaring red flags, but instead creeps into our lives in subtle, often insidious ways. The difficulty in identifying toxic individuals lies in their ability to present themselves as harmless, if not well-intentioned. The behaviors of toxic people may appear benign or even affectionate at first glance, which makes it easy to dismiss the negative impact they have on our well-being. However, over time, the patterns become more evident, and it is essential to recognize them for what they are before they take a greater toll on our emotional, mental, and physical health. One of the most common signs of toxic behavior is manipulation. Manipulative individuals seek to control others for their own gain, often disguising their intentions with charm, pity, or guilt. They may not openly demand what they want, but instead they use subtle tactics to make you feel responsible for their emotions, actions, or decisions. For instance, a toxic person may make you feel guilty for setting boundaries, insisting that your needs or desires are selfish or unreasonable. This tactic is designed to make you second-guess your own judgment and prioritize their feelings over your own well-being. The manipulation may be emotionally subtle, but it is still damaging because it distorts your perception of reality and erodes your self-worth. Another hallmark of toxic behavior is dishonesty, whether in the form of blatant lies or omissions. Toxic individuals often manipulate the truth, sometimes even in ways that seem trivial, but over time these small distortions add up and create a web of confusion. Their dishonesty may make you feel like you are walking on eggshells, constantly questioning what is true and what is fabricated. The psychological toll of this can be profound, leading to anxiety, self-doubt, and a diminished sense of trust in others. As the lies mount, the relationship becomes less about genuine connection and more about control, leaving the other person feeling isolated and disconnected from reality. Toxic people also tend to lack empathy and may disregard the feelings or needs of others in favor of their own desires. In healthy relationships, there is a mutual understanding and respect for one another's emotional experiences. In toxic relationships, however, the toxic person's needs consistently take precedence. They may interrupt, belittle, or dismiss your emotions, leaving you feeling invalidated or unheard. This lack of empathy is not always intentional. Some toxic individuals may simply be so absorbed in their own world that they fail to recognize or respect the emotional boundaries of others. Regardless of intent, the effect is the same: a relationship that is one-sided and emotionally draining. Another critical sign of toxicity is the consistent disregard for personal space and boundaries. Toxic individuals often have an inability or unwillingness to respect the boundaries you set, whether those boundaries are physical, emotional, or psychological. For example, they may constantly interrupt your personal time, demand more attention than you can give, or pressure you into doing things you are uncomfortable with. When you try to assert yourself and express a need for space or rest, they may react with anger or guilt, claiming that you're being unreasonable or cold-hearted. This disregard for boundaries creates an environment where you are unable to preserve your personal sense of autonomy or peace. Toxic behavior may even escalate to verbal or emotional abuse. The toxic individual may belittle you, insult you, or manipulate your insecurities in order to maintain control over you. They may use your vulnerabilities against you, attacking your self-esteem or causing you to question your own abilities and worth. Emotional abuse, though less visible than physical violence, can be equally damaging, leading to long-lasting scars on your mental health and overall outlook on life. The effects of prolonged exposure to toxic people are not just emotional or mental; they can have physical consequences as well. Chronic stress, anxiety, and depression often manifest in physical symptoms, including fatigue, headaches, sleep disturbances, and even more severe health problems. The constant emotional strain of dealing with toxic individuals can weaken your immune system, impair your ability to focus, and diminish your overall quality of life. The more you remain in such an environment, the greater the toll it takes on your body, making it even more critical to recognize toxicity early and take steps to protect yourself. Toxic people create an environment of instability and chaos, constantly pushing the limits of what you can tolerate. They may create drama, stir conflict, or turn every interaction into a crisis, making you feel like you are walking through a minefield, never knowing when the next emotional explosion will occur. This constant state of unpredictability can leave you on edge, unable to relax or enjoy the relationship for what it is supposed to be: a source of mutual support, care, and respect. Recognizing these toxic traits is vital because they allow you to make informed decisions about the relationships in your life. It's important to remember that toxicity is not always intentional or malicious. Some toxic individuals may not even be aware of the harm they cause, and in such cases it's crucial to evaluate whether the relationship can be salvaged through open communication and setting clear boundaries. However, when the toxicity is persistent and refuses to change, the best course of action may be to distance yourself from the individual in order to preserve your own well-being. Understanding these toxic behaviors and the impact they have on your life is the first step in protecting yourself. It is not a sign of weakness to acknowledge that someone's behavior is harmful to you. It is a recognition of your own worth and a step toward taking control of your emotional and mental health. Once you begin to identify these patterns, you can take the necessary steps to distance yourself from toxic individuals and foster healthier, more supportive relationships. The importance of setting boundaries cannot be overstated, as boundaries are not merely a protective measure, but a vital aspect of maintaining a healthy, balanced life. A boundary is essentially a limit, an invisible line that marks where one person ends and another begins. It is an understanding of where your emotional, mental, and physical space begins and how you wish to be treated within that space. Boundaries are a form of self-care, a way of communicating to others what is acceptable behavior and what is not. The act of setting boundaries is rooted in the recognition that you, as an individual, are deserving of respect, peace, and autonomy. In a world that constantly demands our time and energy, boundaries serve as a defense against the overwhelming pressures that can diminish our sense of self and disrupt our inner balance. When boundaries are clearly established, they allow individuals to preserve their sense of identity. In relationships, whether personal or professional, there can be a tendency to lose oneself in the demands and expectations of others. Toxic people, in particular, may exert pressure to conform to their needs and desires, often at the expense of your own. Without boundaries, it becomes difficult to differentiate where your needs and emotions end and where another's begin. This can lead to resentment, burnout, and a diminishing sense of self-worth. Establishing boundaries, on the other hand, reaffirms that you are a distinct person with your own values, desires, and emotional landscape that deserve to be respected. By drawing clear lines, you communicate to others that your peace and individuality are important, thus enabling you to retain a sense of autonomy and self-respect. Boundaries also play a crucial role in reducing stress and emotional exhaustion. Without boundaries, there is a constant push and pull in relationships, with one person constantly overextending themselves to meet the needs of others. This leads to a situation where the person with no boundaries often finds themselves overwhelmed, anxious, and drained. Whether it's agreeing to extra work, saying yes when you mean no, or tolerating toxic behaviors from others, failing to set boundaries creates an environment of emotional and physical depletion. When boundaries are firmly in place, they allow individuals to say no without feeling guilty, set clear expectations, and prioritize their well-being without fear of negative repercussions. Boundaries act as a buffer against the forces that threaten your mental and emotional peace, reducing unnecessary stress and fostering a sense of control over your life. Setting boundaries is also a powerful tool for fostering healthy and respectful relationships. In a relationship where boundaries are respected, both individuals understand each other's limits and act accordingly. This mutual understanding creates a safe and supportive environment where both parties feel valued, heard, and respected. However, when boundaries are not set or are violated, relationships can quickly become toxic and one-sided. For example, in a relationship where one person continually disregards the other's boundaries, whether it's emotionally, physically, or mentally, the result is often feelings of resentment, frustration, and powerlessness. Boundaries establish a clear framework for how individuals can interact with one another in a way that fosters respect, trust, and equality. They are not only a defense mechanism, but also a means of nurturing the relationship, allowing both people to thrive without fear of manipulation or exploitation. It is important to understand that boundaries are not meant to isolate or create distance between individuals. Rather, they are meant to preserve and protect the emotional, mental, and physical well-being of both parties. A boundary, when set with kindness and clarity, is not a rejection of another person, but a respectful assertion of your needs and desires. This distinction is crucial because many people fear that by setting boundaries they will come off as cold, harsh, or uncaring. However, boundaries are not about rejecting others, but about ensuring that your interactions with them are healthy and balanced. For instance, you might set a boundary by saying, "I need some quiet time after work," which is not a refusal of your partner's company, but an honest request to recharge in order to maintain a healthy relationship. By setting boundaries in this way, you cultivate an environment of mutual respect and understanding where both parties feel free to express their needs without judgment or guilt. Boundaries help to clarify expectations in relationships, whether they are personal, familial, or professional. In many instances, misunderstandings arise because one person has not communicated their boundaries or the other person has not respected them. For example, in a work environment, a lack of clear boundaries may result in one employee being asked to take on additional tasks outside of their job description, leading to feelings of resentment and burnout. By establishing boundaries early on, both parties have a clearer understanding of what is expected, what is acceptable, and what is not. In personal relationships, boundaries also provide clarity around emotional needs and limits, reducing the likelihood of conflict and miscommunication. When everyone understands the rules of engagement, relationships become smoother, healthier, and more fulfilling. Setting boundaries also requires an understanding of one's own values and priorities. In order to establish meaningful boundaries, it is essential to first have a deep sense of self-awareness, knowing what is important to you and what you are willing to tolerate. This self-awareness enables you to set boundaries that align with your values, ensuring that they are not arbitrary or reactionary, but rooted in a clear understanding of what is necessary for your well-being. For example, if you value your time and personal space, you may set boundaries that protect your time from being constantly consumed by others' demands. Similarly, if you value honesty and respect, you may establish boundaries that ensure your interactions are grounded in truth and mutual respect, without manipulation or deceit. Setting boundaries is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. As your life evolves and new challenges arise, your boundaries may need to be adjusted to reflect your changing circumstances. At times, boundaries may need to be reinforced, especially if they have been violated or disregarded. This ongoing process requires regular self-reflection and communication, ensuring that your needs are always met and your well-being is consistently protected. While it may be uncomfortable at first, particularly when dealing with people who are accustomed to violating your boundaries, the act of setting and maintaining boundaries becomes easier with practice. It is a skill that, once learned, serves as a powerful tool for preserving your peace and well-being in all areas of life. Setting boundaries effectively is a critical skill for safeguarding one's mental, emotional, and physical well-being, especially when faced with toxic or demanding individuals. The ability to set boundaries is not merely about saying no, but involves a deeper understanding of how to assert oneself with clarity, consistency, and respect. Learning how to communicate your needs, enforce those boundaries, and handle any discomfort that arises from doing so is essential for maintaining healthy relationships and personal peace. The first and most important step in setting boundaries is to clearly identify what your boundaries are. This involves taking a deep look at your own needs, values, and limits. Self-awareness is key. Understanding where you feel uncomfortable or where your energy is being drained can help you determine what boundaries need to be established. For instance, you may realize that you need more alone time, that you cannot tolerate certain kinds of language or behavior, or that you must protect your time to avoid overcommitting. Identifying these personal limits requires reflection and an honest assessment of your emotional and physical responses to various situations. Once you have a clear understanding of your boundaries, you can communicate them more effectively to others. The next step in setting boundaries is communication. This is where many people struggle, particularly when dealing with those who may resist or disregard their boundaries. Clear and direct communication is essential. You need to state your boundaries in a straightforward manner without leaving room for ambiguity. For example, instead of saying, "I don't know if I can do that," it's more effective to say, "I cannot take on that task at this time." It is important to be assertive without being aggressive or passive. Assertiveness involves expressing your needs and desires confidently and respectfully without apologizing or feeling guilty. You are simply stating what you need to maintain your well-being. Often, people hesitate to set boundaries because they fear conflict, rejection, or disappointing others. However, it is important to remember that boundaries are not negotiable, they are essential to your health and happiness. Once boundaries are communicated, it is crucial to remain consistent in enforcing them. Toxic individuals, in particular, may attempt to test your limits or push against your boundaries, especially if they have previously been able to take advantage of your leniency. This is where the importance of consistency becomes apparent. If you say you cannot take on additional work, but then agree to it when asked again, you send mixed signals that undermine the boundary you set. Consistency helps to establish credibility and shows others that you are serious about protecting your space. It is important to stay firm, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. When others see that you respect your own boundaries, they are more likely to respect them as well. The process of setting boundaries is not without its challenges. One of the most common obstacles is the discomfort that comes with asserting your needs, especially in relationships where boundaries have not been set before. Many people fear confrontation or anticipate negative reactions from others. It is natural to feel uneasy when you are accustomed to prioritizing others over yourself. However, it's crucial to understand that this discomfort is a temporary and necessary part of the process. Initially, you may encounter resistance or guilt, especially from individuals who feel entitled to your time or energy. They may argue, make you feel guilty, or try to manipulate you into abandoning your boundaries. In these moments, it is important to stand firm and not be swayed by emotional pressure. Remind yourself that setting boundaries is a form of self-respect and is necessary for your well-being. Another challenge that may arise when setting boundaries is the fear of being perceived as rude, selfish, or inconsiderate. Many people, especially those who are people pleasers or highly empathetic, struggle with the idea of letting others down. However, it is important to realize that boundaries are not selfish. On the contrary, they are an essential part of maintaining healthy relationships. When you fail to set boundaries, you may find yourself overwhelmed, resentful, or emotionally drained, which ultimately harms both you and the other person. Healthy boundaries allow relationships to thrive because they ensure that both parties' needs are respected and met. It's also worth noting that setting boundaries encourages others to do the same, creating a healthier dynamic where mutual respect and understanding are the foundation. Once your boundaries are established and communicated, you may find it necessary to reinforce them over time. People may forget, overlook, or intentionally challenge your boundaries, especially if they have been used to taking advantage of your flexibility. In such cases, it is crucial to be prepared to reassert your boundaries clearly and calmly. This might involve reminding others of the limits you have set or explaining why those boundaries are important to you. For example, if someone repeatedly invades your personal time, you may need to say, "I've mentioned before that I need time to myself in the evenings, and I would appreciate it if you could respect that." Reaffirming your boundaries doesn't have to involve confrontation, but it does require clarity and persistence. The more consistent you are, the more likely others will understand that your boundaries are non-negotiable. Another important consideration when setting boundaries is recognizing that some individuals may react negatively to your newfound assertiveness. Toxic people, in particular, may try to manipulate you, guilt-trip you, or escalate the situation to make you feel bad about setting boundaries. In such instances, it is important to stay calm and not allow yourself to be pulled into their emotional tactics. Practice the art of detachment, remain emotionally neutral, and avoid getting caught in the drama. If necessary, take a step back from the situation and give yourself time to process your feelings before responding. This emotional detachment allows you to handle difficult situations without compromising your boundaries or emotional well-being. It is important to note that setting boundaries is a lifelong process that may need to be revisited and adjusted as your life circumstances change. As you grow, your needs and limits may evolve, and it is important to continually assess and redefine your boundaries. This process of self-reflection and adjustment is not only necessary for your own well-being, but also ensures that your relationships remain healthy and balanced over time. The ability to set, communicate, and enforce boundaries effectively empowers you to lead a life that is not only protected from toxicity, but also grounded in self-respect, peace, and autonomy.